All right, Sergio, thank you for making time to speak to us. So it's been 2 really good days, a lot of discussions around how do we move Africa from where we are to where we want to be. And obviously you've seen a lot of deliberations about, Africa, making sure that Africa is on the table, not, at the menu. So what is your takeaway from these 2 days?
So my key takeaways of these 2 days of meetings, which have really been very exciting, and you could feel, in the corridors, the level of energy, in the panels, the level of conversations, very high level, very interesting, very focused. So my key takeaway, I would really use the expression that our managing director, Maktar Diop, used in his opening remarks, where he said that 10 years ago we used to say Africa can, today we say Africa is, right? So it's really the realization that beyond being a continent of opportunities, Africa is a continent of solutions, and whether it's private sector, whether it's the authorities, whether it's civil society, everyone has to contribute, everyone is contributing. And this is what I think many people throughout these 2 days could realize, could discuss about, and could make also decisions on how these things can go forward.
And I think IFC has been a very big player in terms of igniting the growth of the private sector here in Africa. Could you talk to us a little bit about what came out of the bilateral discussions that you had during these 2 days here, and what are some of the major deals that you signed?
So IFC has been growing its activities in Africa. We've been increasing our footprint, increasing our delivery of projects, increasing the volume of investments that we have been deploying on the continent, but also increasing the number of countries where we operate, right? We have coming to the close of our fiscal year, and we will be financing projects in 41 countries. During this forum, during this Africa CEO forum, we signed a number of transactions that takes our volume of commitment above the 11 billion mark for this fiscal year, which is a record high number. It's very, very important that we did all this. We had a number of bilaterals with companies, with authorities that were here. We also signed, as you said, a few interesting transactions, very diverse, which I think show well what we are doing. We did a large transaction to help biofuel, so in Kenya with Eni, the Italian company, but we also did a small transaction in Mali within a company that is really having an impact on the ground in a country that is going through a difficult time. So we really went through a very large range of transactions. We also signed a number of advisory components, advisory programs, both with governments, helping them with private sector development, like we did sign one here with the authorities in Rwanda, but we also signed with a number of private sector companies to help them improve their standards, improve the way they're working. So it was a very successful 2 days for us also.
Right. And let's talk a little bit about African economic growth, because you've seen a lot of challenges, macroeconomic challenges over the last couple, 2 to 3 years, the pandemic, supply chain disruptions, high inflationary pressures. This year, how do you see the African economic growth going to be? What is the trajectory of growth for the medium term this year and next year?
As we know, Africa went through some very difficult years with a number of crises, the ones you mentioned, COVID, the certain conflicts outside of the region that are impacting the region. And what is important to underline is that these factors have disproportionately impacted Africa compared with other regions. So this is something that I hope is behind us, and I kind of feel that we are at this tipping point where now we are resuming with the macro indicators that are more optimistic, that are more positive, and so we see, like, although debt has gone up significantly, we see a sort of a slowdown in that in the public debt levels in the continent, and maybe even going down in the near future. We're seeing the inflation also going down, and more importantly, we see growth in a very large number of countries in Africa. And when you look at globally the number of countries that have a high growth, Africa is very well represented in that group. Actually, some of the highest growing countries in the world are in Africa. So this is a very good momentum. And what I found very interesting at this CEO forum is that actually the deciders on the private sector, but also on the public sector, all acknowledge this, all see this opportunity, and now are coming up with solutions so that we can move ahead and do more in Africa.
Right. And then some of the shocks that we're talking about are actually external shocks. And I think from the message, whether it's from this closing ceremony, where also people like Aliko Dangote saying Africa is actually positioned to deal with these challenges. What is your assessment, and what do you think Africa can do to future-proof some of these external shocks?
I think when we go through these type of shocks, and we are in a world that is becoming increasingly uncertain, I think it is extremely important to build resilience. And there's a very strong awareness, both at the public sector and the private sector in Africa, that Africa needs to build its resilience, and this resilience will come from Africa. So it's really like focusing on the continent opportunities, the continent solutions. I mean, I can give you many examples, but let's talk about health, for instance, right? When the pandemic hit, everybody realized that, Africa is extremely fragile in terms of health systems, depending a lot on external support, external products, and so on. Since then, including with the support of IFC, we have been seeing that the continent is building its resilience in terms of, increasing its capacity in terms of pharmaceutical manufacturing, increasing the quality of its hospitals, increasing the insurance mechanisms to give universal health coverage. So this is how you build resilience. And Africa has many opportunities that can be seized. Countries can do trade among themselves, can invest in each other, can build regional value chains, and this is, for me, what will build the resilience of the continent and will make it stronger going forward.
And if you were to mention maybe 1 or 2 or 3 things that you think will drive Africa's economic growth in 5-10 years from now, what would those things be?
Well, the first one, I mean, very obviously, and you heard it every minute in this 2 days, is the impact of new technologies, of artificial intelligence, of digitalization. This is transforming the continent. It's happening, and we need to accelerate it. We need to continue investing, particularly on the infrastructure side, digital infrastructure. But this is, for me, one of the big trends that I see for the future of Africa. I also see the second one I would quote or mention is really the what I was talking earlier about, the regional integration, in the sense of more economic links, economic activities between African countries, so that there is more the realization that the African market is a big market and that it should be first served by the African countries and African companies. So that, I think, is a big trend. I think we can also talk about the third trend that has been quite mentioned in these different debates and panels that we had, which is the fact that there's a lot of opportunities linked to the climate challenges, and Africa has a role to play as a climate in the climate agenda, as the continent where very strong production of minerals that are needed for mitigation and adaptation. And if we can, and we are doing this, creating more value in the continent, starting transforming these minerals on the continent, then this is a trend that I think can be accelerated and will have a very strong impact on the continent.
I think as we come almost close to this conversation, at the heart of the conversations were, the private sector. How do you promote and develop and invest in the private sector? And I think key in that, puzzle, the private sector says we're fired up, we want to invest in Africa, but there's a sort of missing link. How do you finance the private sector? How do you raise money to invest into private activities? How do you solve that puzzle?
So, I mean, first, I've mentioned a lot of the opportunities and the positive trends, because, I mean, maybe it's also linked to what I heard over these last 2 days that gave me a lot of optimism. I'm also, like everyone, we also know that there's a number of challenges, and we should not forget those, and we have to address them. One of them that you mentioned is access to finance. I think on our side, what we've been doing, we've been increasing the volume of our commitments, bringing more funding to Africa. We have been mobilizing more funding so that there's more funding available. But I think we have to be a little bit more granular on what is needed. And one of the particular points that I would focus a lot is on the mobilization of domestic resources, so and the domestic savings, so that these can invest and help finance the development of Africa. And for that, we need to develop more capital markets. We need to make them deeper. We need to make them more active. And this is part of the agenda that we've been discussing with some of the actors here, and that we want to support. So there is funding available, but we need to make sure that it is channeled. I was talking about digital economy, so let's also use the new technologies with mobile funding, mobile banking, to help the companies, including the small ones, to get access to financing. There's a lot that can be done, but I think we can find a solution.
And then lastly, how do you see AFCFTA, which is something that people have talked about here during the last 2 days? How do you see that being transformative and helping African economies really take off?
Well, I think we heard it from the heads of state in the panel. They made very, very interesting and positive comments about that, in the sense that the African the Continental Free Trade Agreement or area is really the base, I would say, to set up the stage for this increased resilience and increased reliance of Africa on Africa, right? So it is, I mean, when you look at any region that has gone through a similar process, it is not something that gets done in 2 or 3 days or even 2 or 3 years. It takes time, but it's a direction. And we have, and I think it's exciting to see that we have to accelerate it. And what is interesting at the CEO Forum is that you see that the private sector companies are really subscribing to that vision, and they are African companies are more and more turning to African markets. You have seen an emergence of African champions, and I think this is the direction that we need to go.
All right, thanks a lot, Sergio. Great pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.